right, welcome back to Adaptation. It's a podcast where we talk about books to movies or any written media to visual media.
Which is important this week.
Which is very important this week because they're not actually doing a real novel or classic book. We're doing a comic book.
That's right.
And what are we doing this week, Spear?
We are doing Bryan Lee O'Malley's Scott Pilgrim series.
Oh, yeah. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World.
Yeah.
You're probably more familiar with the 2010 now semi-cult classic movie with Michael Cera. And that's the movie we're going to be talking about, not the show.
Which I was reading about, which apparently is much closer to the source material.
It's definitely more of a direct one-to-one. I only watched one episode, but it was definitely spaced apart like the comic was, as opposed to the movie that was a condensed version of the whole series. So that was a key element. We are not talking about the show, the movie today.
Yeah.
We may revise that and do whatever. We haven't
Fun extra credit.
Fun extra credit.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think we discussed we're going to talk about the main differences first.
Which is important with this one, I think.
Very important. And then go into characters, production, directing, editing, all that fun stuff. So, you want to start with what your biggest difference was between the two?
Easily the span of time. The comics are set over the course of about a year in the lives of these sort of layabout, artsy 20-something Toronans living in Canada. And because of that, you get a chance to really sort of live in a lot of those relationships and dynamics, and a lot of the characters end up more fleshed out. Whereas the movie takes place over the course of maybe a week at most, but probably a few days.
Yeah, I feel like the week, it was so ambiguous in the movie for me.
I feel like intentionally.
Because then you're like, why is it actually played more into the character of Scott with time contention than in the comics. So
it centers him a lot more.
It centers him a lot more as kind of like an obsessive, love-struck man.
Yeah.
Because he's so obsessed with her in the week, versus the whole year from the comic where you're like reading it and you're like, ooh.
It heightens that part of his personality, which it brings a different tone to that character, which I think is, I am glad that we are doing this instead of the show, even though it's probably closer to the source material of the movie, because I do think it comes back to the central question of what is an adaptation. And in this case, I think it's that Edgar Wright really responded to the visual cues as a filmmaker and wanted to explore the stylistic component of the story and sort of use those characters to carry out a lot of those flourishes.
Mm-hmm. You immediately said condensed, and my brain went to, so adaptations are like the Campbell's condensed soup version of real soup.
Exactly.
So like the book is like, I made this tomato soup over the course of like several hours, where I like roasted the tomatoes, I went more in depth, blah, blah, blah. And then the movie or TV show is like, you just add milk.
Yeah.
And it's still tomato soup, but it's not the same.
It'll do the trick, but it's a different thing.
It's a different thing. Yeah. Exactly. I think this is at least episode 7 or 8 of this podcast. And I think that's the crux we're finding is sometimes they're bad. Sometimes the adaptations are just bad.
Yeah.
Sometimes the source material is horrible.
You're right.
And sometimes they're good, just two different things.
Exactly. And I think that's the point of adapting anything. We're talking about comics this week, and I think without going too far into detail on it, you have something like Zack Snyder's Watchmen, which was a very close, almost, well, with the exception of the end, frame for frame sort of recreation of the source material. Mm-hmm. And while it's impressive in its own way, you can tell that it's a serviceable adaptation of a thing that I personally would have felt better off reading. Whereas this was Edgar Wright taking an approach to the material that was making it very much its own.
Mm-hmm. I think for your biggest difference was the time contention, right? My biggest difference between the two would be not exactly tone, but like motivations.
Sure.
In between the two. So like the comic for me, it played out a little bit more because you had more time in terms of character development, like why the characters were doing these things. They built that out over a longer stretch of time. So it's easier for me to understand like who they were versus like in the movie we're thrown into the middle of it. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. But then there's some things where I was like, Why do you just not do that? That'd be good.
Sure.
Just don't do that.
Everybody's more archetypal in the movie.
Yeah, they're more like snapshots or little, they're the sparkling waters flavors of
the LaCroix of themselves.
The LaCroix of themselves of the comic, right? So it wasn't like I felt like the characters were more relatable for me in the comic than the movie. Not to say I didn't love the movie, but
yeah, that
was my biggest difference is of relatability.
Yeah,
between the two,
he really trades that off. I mean, and they really so many of the sequences are just so about themselves, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It is a movie that, to its credit, is very lean. They made a very lean adaptation of the source material, and as a consequence, it is a vivisection of all the cool visual stuff that he saw in the comic and really enjoyed.
Mm-hmm. So do you want to go, I mean, because it's very structured in the comic, there's how many evil exes?
7.
There's 7 evil exes. So basic log line of the movie would be man falls in love with woman, and her baggage is she has 7 evil exes that he has to defeat in order to date her. That's the basic one.
Mm-hmm.
What would your log line be?
Toronto man confronts new partner's baggage while facing his own.
There you go. I mean, he has more baggage in the comic than in the movie.
Yeah.
But do you want to go through it in terms of every ex first and then get into story, or how should we play that out? Because
why don't we take it X by X?
Yeah.
Because ultimately, I think you're right. The structure, Wright and Bacall, the screenwriter Michael Bacall, really do take the structure. They keep that pretty much intact.
Yeah, they're still the same order of who the exes are, and then we can go into the characters that were cut or leaned down.
Yeah,
and then because if we go through this story, I mean, edit that out. Sorry. If you go through the structure of the exes, it actually brings us through the plot.
Yeah.
Anyway, so all right, so X number 1, Matthew Patel. So Matthew Patel in the movie, I watched this with my boyfriend. He'd never seen it, and he's 30 years old, which is a triumph unto its own.
Sure, yeah.
A man who is not a teenager in 2010 did not see this movie.
Oh yeah.
And he was watching it, and he was very confused. He didn't know what Scott Pilgrim, like, the concept was that it's like a comic book, and in the universe of the movie, like, comic book things happen.
Yeah.
And nobody bats an eye. They're just like, oh yeah, he like is fighting this dude in comic book sequences in this bar, and like it's fine. No one like bats an eye. Wallace, his Scott Pilgrim's gay roommate, is like cheering him on. But Wallace is the best. He's the best in both versions, actually. I love him the most.
Yeah.
But Matthew Patel is Ramona Flowers, which is the lead female name, her first evil ex. And they dated in 7th grade, and they kissed once, and then they broke up after a couple of hours, I think. And he is an interesting character because I think in the comic he still has fireballs, right? Like he's still mystical powers, but
he's pretty close. I mean, it's a pretty close of all the exes. He's the closest direct adaptation of his presentation in the comics.
Because there's demon girls, right?
Yeah, it's hipster chicks.
It's hipster chicks.
Yeah,
hot demon hipster.
Tell him, Maddie.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But so they're fighting, and basically he brings like a dance component element. He is Indian in both versions, and it's very reminiscent of Bollywood.
Yeah. Which was very fun. Like
it was very fun, and it wasn't like it was a thing. Like you were like, oh man, it was just like.
Well, because the great visual gag is that Patel is living in a Bollywood number, and I guess vicariously so is Scott. But all the other spectators, his sister Anna, played by Anna Kendrick, is looking at this. What? Like that? It's a really incredible, and I think that also mirrors pretty closely what happens in the comics, where even in the cadence of what they're saying is that sort of sing-song rhyme, which is clearly supposed to be musical.
Yeah.
and they really run with it in the movie, and it's one of the best sequences in the movie.
And when Michael Cera, so they're fighting, and like one Michael Cera plays Scott Pilgrim. We'll go into character actors and stuff at the very end, but he's fighting at the very end. He's like, and then you'll see.
Yeah,
right? Like he brings the rhyming structure back in, and then it disappears from the entire movie completely.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's fine.
Yeah,
and you're like, oh, this is great.
Yeah.
In the comic, they were. I feel like the battle in the comic was a little longer. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe
a hair.
For time. But it was the most carbon copy scene in the whole movie for me.
Yeah.
To the comic.
Yeah.
From Wallace sniping Scott's sister's boyfriend. It's Wallace again. To Wallace calling out like, "What are you wearing? Are you a pirate?" And then the other guy like, "Is he a pirate? Pirates are really in this year." So
it's funny, in the movie, the guy who says, "What are you, a pirate?" or something, that's the screenwriter Michael Bacall.
Really?
Yeah, who is an actor. He's been in, I think he was in a couple of Tarantino movies. He was in like, he does, I think he sort of does both, but he wrote the script to this with Edgar Wright, and they work together on something. They're working on a Running Man remake right now, or adaptation right now.
I did not know that he was the screenwriter. That's such a funny cameo.
Yeah, it's great.
Are you a pirate?
Pirates are in it.
That's when we first find out that like Ramona did not used to be a very nice person.
Yeah.
And so that's why like these evil exes have cropped up. And it kind of brings a little bit of a like, oh, I wonder who the other evil exes are. It's like a hook for the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
Because if you didn't know there was 7 and you didn't know that she was not a nice person to begin with.
Yeah.
Before she met Scott, even when she does meet Scott, I probably wouldn't be interested in who the rest of them were.
Well, part of what I love about this, and that they touch on her not being a great person and sort of having this arc to her life, is that the entire theme of the comics and the movie is that the greatest moral failing you can have is to be a 20-something. Like you're for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Like being in your 20s is absolute wasteland of constant moral sacrifice.
They bring that into full clarity with like Scott mooching off his roommate.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Like he doesn't have a job. He's like, oh, like when they take the tour of the apartment in the first scene, like before the Patel fight. And
which is another pretty direct pull from the comics.
It's a direct pull. It's like an actual like page from the comic. And it was like showing everything in this rundown apartment with one bed on the floor that he shared.
And the specific labels.
The labels. And it was
each.
Like Wallace's computer, Wallace's coat. Scott's
better than
coat.
Scott's. Yeah. Well, and it also, oddly enough, reminded me of another similar visual scene from a previous episode, Fight Club, where they're looking around his apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the IKEA catalog apartment, and everything is labeled based on its little Swedish name.
Do you think that was like a nod to from the comic artist?
Maybe, because I think that both they talk a lot about how the comics, and I think the movie by extension, are very transmedia in that they cover so much ground, and they really do dabble in a range of different mediums pretty nonchalantly. Mm-hmm. There's a line early on where Scott says, Ramona, I'm in love with you in the comics, and I think we can make this relationship work. Or I know we can make this relationship work. That is a direct line from a 1997 John Cusack movie called Grosse Point Blank.
That was from Grosse Point Blank?
It's from Grosse Point Blank.
Oh my gosh, I am not, I apologize, listeners. I am not that up on, I should be a better screenwriter. What's wrong with me?
No, but it's, I only know that because I've seen the movie like 10 times. I love the movie.
Yeah.
But it is such a deep hole. Everything about this world and the culturally that they exist in is like indie art, independent, like everything about it is like, except for maybe video games, is extremely like sort of underrepresented media.
Oh yeah. I feel like in the comic they do, well, there's some direct lines from the first act. This is all from beginning to Patel fight.
Yeah.
Right? About them like cutting between different dates with him and Knives Chow.
Yeah.
Which is like a high schooler who's ridiculous because he's supposed to be like 22.
Yeah. He's 23.
He's 23.
He's 23.
Yeah.
And Kim Pine, played by Allison Pill, great character.
Casting.
Great in the comic, great in the movie.
Yeah.
Just deadpans him repeatedly, constantly, just tells him to his face what an awful human being he is.
You were the salt of the earth. Thank you. You know, I meant the scum of the earth. Thank you.
If I had a face, I would punch it or something. Yeah.
Oh yeah, she's the best. So we circling back, we're fighting Matthew Patel.
Yeah.
Scott defeats Matthew Patel with one big giant punch, and he turns into a pile of coins.
Yeah.
Not enough for even bus fare, but he's essentially dead. They don't actually like play off in the comic. They're like, oh, I'm gonna kill you, like blah blah blah, turns into coins. And, like, what about these people's families? They're just like a pile of coins. Like, what happened?
Well, it's such an interesting. It really establishes the magical realism of the story, where it is you take these very heightened literal circumstances, and everybody in that world accepts that it's just a thing that happens. You've created a world where you don't have anyone questioning the fiber of the universe they live in, and that's just a thing that happens. Like, it's when he punches him and he bursts into coins, that's just something that happens when you fight someone and they lose.
In this universe, yeah. Because
this is a video game world. Like in its DNA, like if there are two things, it's video games and shonen style manga.
Yes.
That O'Malley, the original artist, was really interested in.
There is one big difference, I think, between this fight, the beginning before the fight, and between the movie and the comic, so to speak. And it was the establishment of Scott Pilgrim as the greatest fighter they know.
Which is very funny.
Which is so funny. Because I was watching it and then reading the comic, and I was like, yeah, Scott Pilgrim's like the best fighter in our town. Like, he's the best. And then you see Michael Cera, and they don't say anything about that.
Yeah.
They're like, no one mentions his fighting prowess whatsoever in the beginning, which is kind of funny for the movie.
Yeah.
But then in the comic, they can kind of circle around and bring those video game elements back in. They're like, oh, they're at the drugstore trying to get drinks and like power ups, and he's taking like 45 minutes to decide what free drinks he wants.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? So I feel like the comic book leaned more into the video game universe than the movie.
Yeah.
Especially even in the beginning, like establishing rules and whatnot. They're kind of like, oh, they're fighting. You turn into coins. Okay, we're just going about our day. It's not like, oh, we can get power ups, or like, hey, I got this sword. I became longsword proficient in 5th grade.
Yeah,
you know what? Like, none of that is in the movie.
Oh yeah.
So that for me was like a bigger difference between the first act, sort of like establishing the rest of the universe.
Yeah. Again, I really He saw this as a visual playground. He likes the video game reality as long as it serves the structure and function of like the scene. That's his focus, his obsession.
It's his bread and butter.
Yeah.
So to speak. So we defeat Matthew Patel. He starts dating Ramona. However, he was still dating Knives.
Two-timing.
He was two-timing the Knives.
Scum of the earth, Scott Pilgrim.
So finally, and the way they make Michael Cera's character even in the movie, he's like, oh, I'm just like, I don't wanna. Like, I can't. Do you want to do it for me, Wallace? No, I'm not going to break up with Knives Chow for you.
But it's hard.
And eventually she I feel like Knives Chow cut her hair to look like Ramona's before he breaks up with her in the movie.
She gets it cut short because she's going also for that sort of like indie rock style, because she doesn't have a confident sense of who she is.
No, not at all, especially in the movie.
Yeah.
More in the comic she does, but like.
Well, and I think that was an interesting structural change for her character, that because the story takes place over a longer span of time in the comics, the thing that happens is that people have these fights and relationship conflicts, and then they just kind of stay in each other's circles. And that's what happens with Knives, is that she stays with this group of older people that she's been hanging out with, and they make jokes about her getting beer when they go to the bar and like how funny that thing that is, and everybody's like, no, it's not really funny. She's a teenager.
Yeah.
But that was the biggest, because Ellen Wong, who was, I think, terrific.
Oh, she's perfect. That's Knives Chow.
And is a great performer. She was in Glow, which is one of my favorite shows.
I do love Glow.
She's phenomenal in it. And she really gets what Wright's going for and really works with that condensed version of the character as well.
Mm-hmm. So Michael Cera breaks up, or Scott Pilgrim breaks up with Knives Chow.
Yeah.
And then he's like fully free to pursue Ramona Flowers, who's like, in my opinion, like not really interested in him at first. But then she's like, I don't want to have sex with you, Pilgrim, but I reserve the right to change my
mind later. Yeah.
But you're like, but it seems like you're not even her character at this point in the story was very scattered to me. I was like, the motivations behind why she's going out with him.
Yeah.
Unclear.
Well, she's because I think for a lot of people, date socially. Like that's the thing is she is new in town.
Mm-hmm.
She is coming off of a pretty emotionally stressful situationship with a guy we'll discuss later.
Yep.
And she's listening. She is weighed down by her perception of her own baggage,
mm-hmm.
and she doesn't know how to process those things without rendering a judgment that's a little harsh for her.
I feel like Scott in the movie was more of a matter of convenience
mm-hmm.
than an actual in the beginning.
Yeah, and I do think in the comic, she does seem more interested in Scott.
Yeah,
romantically. Mm-hmm. The setup is the same. Mm-hmm. She's an Amazon.ca driver,
delivery person with magical kids.
And he orders some CDs, and she comes to their door, and he sets up their first date. But you get the sense that she is more interested in she gets more developed in that relationship. But going back to a point that you made earlier, which I think is very smart, is that because of the condensed story, mm-hmm. Scott seems a lot more unhinged and a lot more emotionally unstable. And it makes her seem more reasonable and grounded for keeping her distance with this guy
mm-hmm.
who is like interested in her, but maybe not for healthy reasons, not for the healthiest reasons. I mean, like,
yeah, it seems like it's for Scott in the movie, like one, she's traversing his inner mind highway to save time, yeah. And like maybe that planted a seed of obsession in his head.
Sure, yeah.
Who knows? But it seems that like her aloofness in the movie and his obsession works well for the convention, but it also works well for his storyline.
Yeah.
We'll get into the very end, but the switcheroo at the very end makes more sense because he was obsessed with her.
Sure.
So it does work for the movie plot, the way that they structured it.
Yeah.
It just seemed like I'm just like, why, like, she seems like a strong individual. She's like aloof, mysterious, like kind of a badass, but then she just like, hey, fuck, I'll date you. It's whatever.
Well, she's guarding something. It reminds me a lot of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, where you have these men who are attracted to her. She's like, I'm just a girl looking for her own peace of mind. Like it's hard when she's like trying to figure out who she is, moved away specifically so she can get away from that version of herself.
Yeah.
And then finds herself right back.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. Kind of a toxic dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so talked about her toxicity, and then that brings up another evil ex. So who's her second evil ex?
Lucas Lee.
So crazy. Who plays him?
Mr. Captain America himself, Mr. Chris Evans.
Does he have a nose prosthetic? I feel like he has a...
Maybe.
Yeah, it looks like so.
Because I think in the comic, he sort of, I think he was trying to match him pretty closely to the comic, especially with the chin strap beard.
So ridiculous.
Which was very funny. Chris Evans, incredibly funny in this movie.
My boyfriend made a great comment. He's like, Chris Evans loves to play the bad guy, which so when he was in Captain America, that's the opposite of what he has always played. Every other movie, like Knives Out, he's the annoying, he's the evil guy. In this one, he plays a bad guy. There's another one he played besides a rom-com that he was just like the bad guy.
Well, he gets to be funnier. Chris Evans is fun.
Yeah.
And I think that what the MCU does is it kind of flattens everybody out because it's Disney. Yeah. Disney owns, America's babysitter owns Marvel. So, or at least the movie rights. And so as a consequence, everybody kind of gets. And some of the characters are funny and whatever. But like, even if you go back to his first comic book performance, Fantastic Four, he plays
Johnny,
who is a protagonist, but a very antagonistic force in the film. And he's just good in that pocket because he's a very handsome, very charismatic guy.
He plays hot douchebag
very well. Yeah.
And he knows his thing. So I'm very curious, Chris Evans, if you ever listen to this podcast, are you actually just a hot douchebag, or like, do you have a genuine heart? Are you Captain America?
Yeah.
Or Lucas Lee?
Either way, you want to come on the pod.
Yeah.
Tell us.
Come on down.
Be a friend of the pod. Just send us a tweet or whatever books you like.
An X. Is it still, what if?
It's X now.
What are they?
It's on Blue Sky.
What, so if it's not called Twitter, and the posts are not called tweets, what are they called on X?
I don't know. Seegers?
They're called Qs. Or U's.
They're evil X's.
Evil X's, yeah. So Lucas Lee is a movie star that Ramona dated in high school when they had drama, or maybe math. She can't remember, because she was kind of a bitch back then.
Sure.
And
I just remember there being a lot of drama.
There being a lot of drama, yeah. And they fought all the jocks off that year, and they dated for about a week, and then she met someone else.
Yeah.
So basically, they arrive on set. Well, in the comic, they're not on set.
They start on set. Yeah.
They do?
At the castle. What's it called?
Is that in the movie or the comic?
In both.
In both. Okay.
Yeah.
So they're like going for a walk. I think in the movie, they just inadvertently show up there.
Correct.
In the comic, he seeks him out.
Yes, because it's much more clear that like
he's going through the line.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's like actively trying to battle, versus in the movie, they kind of just find him and he's like, oh, I'll battle him.
Well, and initially it's because Scott is, so if Scott and Ramona are in a date, she makes a neutral comment about his hair being shaggy, and he immediately feels ashamed and puts a hat on, and they go for a walk because he wants an excuse to keep the hat on.
Yeah.
Because he's an incredibly insecure guy.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's what Michael Cera does, play insecure very well.
He's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the comic, it's more like direct in that he goes up to Lucas Lee and is like, let's fight. And in the movie, they do a very fun play on like action, and he starts saying a line, but then he's like actually saying the line to Scott.
Yeah.
And then he's like, I'm going to kick your ass. And you think it's in the movie, like what they're filming, and no, it's like he's actually just saying that to Scott. So they start fighting.
Yeah.
And a funny like nod to stunt doubles in the movie was that instead of like fighting him directly the whole time, he brings in all of his lookalike stunt doubles and they all beat him up.
Yeah. Looks like you see it.
It looks like you see it. And so then you think you think Scott's going to lose. So it's kind of like, oh no, he's going to die kind of thing. Yeah. But I'm going to ask you not a trick question. Do you think that Scott is smarter in the movie or the comic?
In the movie.
In the movie, yeah.
I think easily. And I actually, that comes up with an X later. Mm-hmm. I'll save that. I'll bookmark that. But I do think that he is sharper overall in the movie almost because he has to be. In the comic, he is fighting within himself to mature to the point where he can be in a relationship with somebody and have the relationship mean anything at all. Mm-hmm. And in the movie, he's just moving through these stations to get through this process. It's a much clearer cut. It's almost structured more like playing a straightforward video game.
Mm-hmm. In the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is the smart thing he does with Lucas Lee?
He tricks him into doing a skate trick and going down the rail.
So a skate.
An ollie.
Lucas Lee.
No, grind.
A grind,
bro.
It's got a grind, bro. And Lucas Lee owns in the comic, he was a pro skater. They set that up in the beginning, and in the movie, he was like, I own my own skate company. So I bet you can't do a thingy down that. It's like an exceedingly long staircase.
It's 200 steps down. Yeah. The rails are garbage.
So you saying you can't do the thingy, and he basically reverse psychologies him into killing himself.
Yeah.
By doing this dangerous trick.
Yeah.
And then you hear, that's a wrap, folks. He's just the movie's done filming because the main scar
is so well, and that's what's great is you can tell Edgar Wright is really enjoying the meta text of the film set, because as soon as Lucas Lee leaves his trailer to come to set, you hear the Universal stinger opener, and they time his motions, his like neck cracks to the drum beat in the thing, and then even to when he put his skateboard down on the ground, those thuds time with the measures in the Universal stinger. And then he's just really, Edgar Wright is really enjoying, and cinematographer Bill Pope, who shot The Matrix, incidentally. I mean, an incredible team here.
Oh, action centered people
really, really understand. I think it also, bit of a side note, it means that the choreography, I think, is actually shot pretty well.
Oh yeah, I've seen this movie a couple times, and watching it yesterday again, I was like, if I really paid attention, I could tell when the stunt was in.
Yeah,
I really had to pay attention.
It was well shot.
Yeah,
it was very clear.
There was just a couple moments in a couple of the fights where I'm like, they're holding on the above shot a little long because they want more of the action in there, but if they go down, you can see his face. So like, I think that's also why they made his hair look like that. Yeah, because it's easier to fake a wig.
You can put a pronounced wig on somebody.
Oh yeah,
and it'll just like, oh well, yeah, his hair sucks. Yeah,
his hair sucks. So they just kind of made his hair suck.
Yeah,
it sucked in the comic too. But so Lucas Lee is dead.
Yeah,
Second Evil X down.
Yeah,
and we're like going through. We're like, okay, I think Ramona had left set, right? She's just like, I don't want to deal with this.
She fucked off because she was like, I don't want to deal with this.
Yeah,
she's tired.
She's tired of these evil X's, and we don't know for a fact how many other, quote, Scott Pilgrims there have been since she left. Well, it hasn't been long since she left Gideon.
No, because she only just moved to Canada from New York, and she really moved to get away from you.
Yeah.
So
this must be the first time. Well, now that brings in like a plot hole for me, in that, like, how does she know about the League of Evil X's unless, she was told directly that that's what it was, or if there was another Scott Pilgrim type person who had to go through the process, so that's why she knows about the process.
That sort of struck me as well, because I think it comes up when they're, because Matthew Patel brings up the League. Matthew Patel, when they're fighting, is like, didn't you get my email? Didn't you get my letter? I explained the situation. And so Ramona's there.
Yeah.
And she's hearing that firsthand with him.
But she also gives her number to Scott with the 7 X's on it. And Wallace points out.
Well, I think that's probably either a visual foreshadowing and you're just like, yeah, whatever. Or maybe she did have some prior knowledge of it and knew.
Yeah.
And just didn't want to tell him.
It just seems a little weird in terms of like story. Sure. Of like, maybe that's why, it makes sense that that's why she was so hesitant to date him, because she knew what he'd have to go through.
Yeah.
And like, hey, this guy is so persistent.
Yeah.
But she also, like, throughout the movie plays a little like dumb. If she knew about the League, she'd have an idea of who the evil X's would be, and wouldn't she give him more of a heads up?
Well, I think in the movie, I got the sense that once she heard Patel talking about the letter and the email, I'm trying to explain this to you.
Yeah.
Even on the bus, she says, you may have to fight my 7 evil X's. Okay. So I think it's that she's finding out about these things in tandem with Scott.
Okay.
And then she's like, oh, and also she's like, oh, well, it probably in the back of her mind, she realizes that it's Gideon doing this.
Yeah.
She's probably putting stuff together in the back of her mind and just not telling him, which I think is an interesting character beat from everyone in the story, which is that they're all kind of not dealing with their problems or their past.
That's true.
So I think that sort of ties in the thing of maybe she knows more, maybe she doesn't. Yeah. But I think she's just not telling him stuff.
Yeah.
Any more than he's not telling her stuff about, like, Knives Chow.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's sort of an interesting beat for her, because she's just like, she's probably, and even in the comics, she's not even around for the Lucas Lee fighting. She's not, she's sort of popping in and out, and Scott's sort of going on his own mostly independent journey.
Yeah.
With these X's as he's fighting them.
Mm-hmm.
And she's kind of there to give him prior knowledge before he goes into things.
Yeah. It does make a little bit more sense that she well, not really. Not on like thing. It just like I feel like the comic did a little bit of a better job at establishing that she knew more about it.
I do,
Yeah.
but I think that I think the leaps you have to make in a movie aren't so bad that they don't make sense or don't tie into her character.
They do make sense for the character that they can't communicate. Like
Yeah.
even Scott is horrible at communicating. He's like, oh, I don't want to talk to the landlord in the comic. Or
You're
like,
right.
Or he just
Which is ignored in the movie, but it's very funny.
oh yeah. He did like and so yeah, I think that's another crux of the story component for both Scott and Ramona. Is like they have horrible communication skills.
They can't talk to anybody.
They can't talk to anybody.
And almost nobody in this comic. Like the only person who has the spine to be honest and clear with people is Wallace. Like
maybe his sister.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's because her and Wallace are like a duo, and he's like, how do you know I was dating a 17-year-old, Wallace? And he's like, sorry.
Yeah. Even Julie, who, side note, my lovely wife Julie, was identified very closely with Aubrey Plaza's character when the movie came out, as she often does with Aubrey. And
she's nicer than Aubrey Plaza.
She is much. Oh, believe me, like she is. But from a visual style sense, the parallels were drawn very closely between the two.
Mm-hmm.
But even like Julie in the story is very like, she's direct, but she's still guarding her own issues, especially in the movie, where she's like clearly sucking up. And they make it a reference in the comics too, where she's sort of sucking up to Envy Adams.
Oh yeah.
Even though they didn't get along when she was there and wasn't famous.
Oh yeah.
Like everybody's kind of dancing around their intentions and their needs, because again, they're all morally inept 20-something archetypes.
It's harder to say the hard thing than just ignore it. Yeah, for sure. So that brings us into the third ELX, which was Todd and this is how they also bring in Scott's main ex, Envy Adams, which is Brie Larson in the movie.
Yeah.
And in the comic, it's more like they had more setup of, they've known each other for forever, and then she moved away and she was hanging out with her old friend Todd, and then she ended up cheating on Scott with Todd.
Yeah.
And Todd is the bassist in Envy Adams' band.
Yeah.
Which is, what's her? Clash of Demon Head.
Clash of Demon Head.
Clash of Demon Head. And so they're like, which one? The Black Sheep cover from the movie. I listened to the full vocal of Brie Larson singing that song. It's amazing. But
Canadian band Metric.
Yes. It's very good.
Yeah, it's a great song.
But Todd is the bassist, and his most notable attribute is that he is vegan.
Oh God. One of the funniest bits in the whole thing out of the comic or the movie.
So good, because vegans apparently in this universe have psychic powers.
He went to Vegan Academy.
Obviously. And in the I feel like there's just a slight differential in how he got to Vegan Academy. In the comic, his dad made him go.
Yeah.
And in the movie, he just went.
They mention it, and I don't think that they mentioned the circumstances.
Yeah. So it's just like he goes to Vegan Academy, and that's why him and Envy Adam. No, that's why he and Ramona stopped dating.
Yeah, right.
It's because he went to Vegan Academy, right? Yeah. So they meet at Clash of Demon Head's show.
Yeah.
And because Scott was talking to Ramona about how like Envy, cheated on him with this guy named Todd, and she's like, "Oh, I dated a Todd."
Yeah.
And then they get to the show, and he's like, "That's Todd," and she's like, "I know." And
yes.
Like, you know. And it's,
oh no.
No. It's the same Todd.
Yeah.
Same vegan psychic power Todd.
Yeah.
And so they're all hanging out backstage, and this is a carbon copy from the comic. They're all backstage, and Julie's there, and she's sucking kiss ass to Envy, and and Brie Larson in the movie, I think, is more like, I want you to be jealous, Scott, even though like she broke up with him.
Yeah.
Versus the comic is like, you can tell that he still harbors feeling.
Oh, he's still deeply wounded by that breakup. That's his big breakup.
Yeah.
And I think, again, span of time changes her arc tremendously, where she is a pretty consistent premise from her first mention through the end of the comics. She's a pretty important character. And not that she's not an important character in the film, obviously, but you flesh out her dynamic even more And to the point where you do empathize with her much more in the comics, where again, she lives in this soup of 20-something relationship madness. And they're all making bad decisions and terrible mistakes.
She has more redemption in the comic because there's more time for redemption for the side character. She's not main character, and that she's just like, oh, that's his evil ex.
Right.
Yeah.
She's a boss.
She's a boss.
Yeah.
So they're hanging out backstage, and she's still dating Todd. She's dating Envy Adams is dating vegan Todd, and then there's Ramona and Scott on the other couch across from them.
Yeah.
And it's funny because in the movie he has a 3 on his shirt.
Yeah.
Like he's the third, and they allude to the numbers of the exes like in background images throughout the whole movie, which I think is pretty funny. But oh no. Todd punches Knives Chow in the movie.
That's right.
And so Scott,
not in the comics.
Not in the comics. Right. He's like, I'm not afraid to
I'm not afraid to punch a girl. I'm a rock star.
And so Scott gets pissed because, he hit a girl, and so he has some moral compass on that type of scope. So Scott goes to punch him, and that's when we find out he has psychic powers.
Yeah. Well, actually, so the funny bit in the movie is they make it, the last straw for him is that he shits on Toronto. Like he's like, so you guys do? I think Julie's like, so are you guys doing anything fun while you're in town? He's like, in Toronto? It's like, you cocky cock.
That line would not have worked with any other actor.
No, it's
like
terrific.
Don't
pay for your crimes against humanity.
So perfect. And so they're fighting, and Scott's losing.
Yeah.
Very clearly losing. I can't remember. Is there a base battle in the comic or just in the movie?
There is a base battle, and he gets crushed pretty badly by Todd. So I think this was an interesting example of how they structured, because this particular volume is structured around 2 challenges that he has with Todd. The first is that they have to run through Honest Ed's department store.
That was so weird.
Yeah, and very random, but also feels like a specific pull.
Yeah.
Feels like a very specific reference to something.
Yeah. We just don't know what.
Yeah. And it's he has to go through that, and then they have the base battle when they go in, I believe, for it, because in the comics they're booked, they're meeting them on Friday, and then they have a show on Sunday.
Yes. So they have 2 encounters with Todd, which they condense into one.
Into one encounter in the movie. And that's when we come up to the base battle, which Scott loses badly, which brings us to the point of victory.
Point of victory, which also makes Scott in the movie more intelligent than the comic.
That's it. That's exactly what I was thinking of earlier.
So he gets knocked into the green room in the back, and he's like, oh, can we have a toast of coffee to victory or whatever? And he's basically using the pride and the ego of his opponents against them.
Yeah.
Like, oh, obviously, like Todd has vegan psychic powers. He can read Scott's mind.
Yeah.
Quote, read Scott's mind. So he has 2 coffee cups. One has regular half and half. One has soy.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, you want this one? I put it in soy. He's like, obviously, you wouldn't offer me the one with soy. So I'm going to grab the one that you're going to drink for yourself, because that's the one that
it's real Princess Bride.
Really Princess Bride Pole, another episode of ours. And he drinks it, and he's like, well, no, I just really focused really hard on thinking I put soy in that
with my mind's eye or whatever.
And turns out Todd is drinking the half and half, which is
half and half, baby.
Which is illegal for a vegan because they don't eat dairy, meat products, or anything with a face.
Yeah.
And then the vegan police come crashing through.
Oh.
As a former vegan myself, when I first saw that, like, after having been vegan for a while, I almost peed my pants.
Yeah.
Because that's like a huge thing in the vegan community.
Sure.
Of like, oh, if you ever have any animal product, you're going to go to vegan jail.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I accidentally had some cheese in my salad. I didn't know. And it's fine.
He even makes the knockout comment at one point where he's like, ovo-lacto vegetarian, maybe.
Not true vegan. And like, like it's a big stigma in the community of like, if you have anything even once or twice, like, you're not a true vegan, you're not a real part of the community. And that's false, like, I mean, I'm not vegan now, so I can't really speak on it. But the vegan police come crashing through the door, and they're like, well, don't I get 3 offenses? Yes. On February 21st, you ingested gelato. Gelato's not vegan. It has milk and eggs, bitch.
Thomas Jane's line there. Thomas Jane and Clifton Collins Jr. are perfect in these cameos. Because again, Edgar Wright knows how to shoot these bits, and he understands how to get just the right cadence out of his performers to make these bits sing. Where he's just like, it's milk and eggs, bitch. Like, it's the funniest line.
And then on April 21st, you ingested chicken parmesan. Chicken parmesan's not vegan.
Well, and it's funny because in the comic book, Envy orders him gelato.
Yeah.
While they're at brunch, and then he just eats it anyway.
And the drummer's like, doesn't that have?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who, incidentally, in the comic, he's sleeping with.
Oh, yeah.
He's cheating on Envy in the comics with the drummer.
I wonder if the creator, Scott Pilgrim, ever got cheated on. There's a lot of cheating.
Yeah. It's that's obviously a pretty clear touch point for him.
Yeah.
In some respect. But I think it's also the thing of like, I like being in social groups like that. It's a thing that people like. It's a bad decision that a lot of people make.
It happens. I mean, like Envy cheated on Scott, and then Todd cheats on Envy, and Scott cheats on Ramona, and it's just, and no one's a winner.
Well, and to his credit, if it is a personal thing, he doesn't come at it from a place of bitterness necessarily. He comes at it from a place of it's the hurt people narrative of the human experience, where like that kind of behavior is typically cyclical. Yeah. Or very often it's cyclical.
So, because the vegan police take away his vegan powers, Scott defeats him pretty easily. His hair, his spiky blonde hair deflates because that's his vegan powers. And so Todd's daddy gets more coins.
Once you were a vegan, now you will be gone.
So stupid. You're like, oh. Okay, so that's Evil X number 3.
Yeah.
Then we're briefly introduced to Evil X 4.
Yeah.
Which is Roxy.
Yeah, right.
Which, clear component of both versions, they're not Evil X boyfriends.
Evil X's.
They're Evil X's. Yeah. Why do you keep saying that?
Yeah.
And there's a 1-to-1 with like Scott's walking home and Roxy comes and he like punches her in the boot. You touch me, you punch me in the boot.
Yeah.
Which is she's the voice of Katara in Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Yeah, that's
which is fascinating to me. Yeah. But then she like disappears and they're going to go out another day. The same thing happens, like a prelude to the actual fight.
Well, and that's interesting too, because this is where Knives plays a larger role in the comics, because now her father, who has found out that she was having a dalliance with a 20-something dude,
a white guy,
is now stalking him with one of his prized antique samurai swords.
And he's like, "Who is that guy?" He thinks he's one of. It's like he's old. He thinks he's one of Ramona's exes.
Yeah.
It's like, did you date an old guy?
Yeah.
No, it's Knives Chow's dad.
Yeah.
Which is so funny. Because in the comic, it's like a blatant, like, I don't know if this is semi-racist, but it was so funny when I was reading it, where they basically go through a battle with Scott and Roxy in the comic.
Yeah.
With the swords and everything. And Scott kind of proves his worth as a human being.
Yeah.
Not 100%, but enough to be like, it's okay. And her dad comes home and her Knives Chow is with her friend.
Yeah.
And he starts talking to her in Chinese about like how he could accept someone like Scott dating his daughter.
Yeah.
And then he leaves and then Knives Chow was like, what did he say? It's like, I don't know. He was speaking Chinese.
Yeah. Well, it's also, it's an interesting joke about like generations of immigrants where it's like the next generation, slowly the language sort of passes out.
Yeah.
Of use. There's even like, there's a line. This is one of those points that is interesting because it's often used to highlight sort of like Scott's being a manipulative douchebag, where they're at a record shop and she's trying to tell him that she loves him. And he says, "Are you even allowed to dance sign of your race?" It's just like, oh, you suck.
Yeah.
You dickhead.
Like, I don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're just like, okay.
Yeah.
So those are just little funny 1-to-1s. I don't know if they're politically correct, but they're entertaining.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, so the Knives Chow's dad isn't in the movie. he was cut. He's one of the characters that got cut.
Yeah.
Roxy is, and she is Ramona's bi-curious dalliance from college. And in the comic, she sticks around longer than all the other exes, and she's like, well, she stayed over and we didn't make out a ton, but she's like, was still cheating on Scott.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter because it's a girl, and cheating doesn't count if it's with a girl.
And they were having a fight.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, so there are a couple points, because again, this takes place over a longer period of time.
They fight a lot.
Yeah, they fight a lot.
Yeah.
I believe at this point they were living together.
No.
Not yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah. No, they got into a fight, and he comes over. I don't think they're living together. I could be wrong. But he comes over, and Roxy's like walking down the stairs.
Yeah.
And but then when they get back together, because he stayed at Lisa's sister's house.
That's right.
Yeah. Which is another character that was cut from the movie, which I think good riddance.
I mean, if you have air to breathe in the comic where like you have time to explore this, and this, then all right, do whatever. But like
Lisa's character is basically another person from high school that Scott and Kim went to high school with, and they brought her into the comic for me as a like trigger of infidelity, like that cyclical infidelity was coming back in.
Yeah.
So she's in town for a little bit, and she's like, it was basically a fight topic for Ramona and Scott. She wasn't really a character that was important.
She's there to test him in the comics to accept that he can tell Ramona that he loves her.
Yeah.
It gets him to the point where he can use the L word.
Yeah. Lesbians.
But she is there to test him in a moment to see, like, is he going to cheat or is he going to make the healthier decision and say, no, set a boundary, recognize you're in a toxic place.
Mm-hmm.
Just be ready to communicate with this person.
Yeah. In the movie, so she's not, Lisa's not in there, but Roxy is. And so when they have the fight, they're in a bar. And there was a reflection of one-to-one where he's like, I can't hit a girl. And she's like, Ramona's like, well, you're going to have to. Yeah. And so she's behind him using his,
like a puppet.
using Scott Pilgrim as a puppet during her fight with Roxy. Which, I may also not remember correctly, she helped Scott in the comic as well.
Well, she helped Scott fight Envy too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Envy fights in the comic, but not in the movie. So the classic hammer is the one she uses against Evie in the comic, but in the movie, she uses the hammer against Roxy.
That's right. Yeah.
And not a baseball bat with the comic. But they're fighting, and and they're like, so, like, what's her weak spot? Behind the knees. And it's just like the funniest little finger. And she's just like such a stereotype of lesbian.
Which is what they use on Envy. In the comics, that's Envy's weak spot.
Yeah.
That's nothing to do with it.
I think they cut out the whole fighting between Envy and Ramona and like to clean up that whole like exes. They wanted to keep current person fighting one set of ex. Yeah. Not current person like flipping the dynamic.
Sure. Yeah.
It was cleaner that way, I think.
Yeah.
With Roxy, it was like some of it was very stereotypical for like the queer community.
Sure.
With Roxy, which some of it was pretty funny. You're bi-curious. I'm bi-furious. And she calls her a has-been at one point. So just a lot of like funny little quips in there, but she was a pretty small fight in the movie. Yeah. Compared to others. Yeah. So that's number 4. Yeah. 5 and 6 are very different from the comic and the movie. And who are 5 and 6 because they are connected.
So they are the twins. They are the Takayanagi twins, who in the comics have a lot of dialogue and they fleshed out characters. Mm-hmm. They like 1960s Batman style kidnap Kim at one point.
Yeah, she kidnap Kim and then Kim moves away. Yeah. In the comic, and you're like, what the heck? Like, yeah. But then she comes back and it's like...
Yeah, well, and that's, I think, it harkens to the structure of the comics where pretty much every ex, or in this case, team of exes, gets their own fleshed out comic. Mm-hmm. Everybody gets their own volume, where as they're going through the relationship dynamics of the group, they also get a chance to give the exes more room to breathe.
Yeah, no, and I think that's important for the comic, and I like that aspect of the comic, but it wasn't even necessary for the movie.
Well, everything's so pared.
It's so pared down.
The movie is a missile. It just needs to move from start to finish, and it's that Edgar Wright rapid fire. Like it just needs to move.
Bing, bang, boom.
Yeah.
In the movie, in the comic, they were robotics people.
Yeah, they're constantly sending robots to fight Scott.
So there's like a robot sci-fi element of him fighting robots in the comic. In the movie, it's more concise and it makes a lot of sense that they are the final battle of the battle of the bands between Sex Bomb and the two twins who are just like EDM keyboardists who don't even sound good, but like their battle it's an amp battle. And there's a fun visual with like the twins whenever they played, they conjured two dragons. Yeah. And then when Sex Bomb played at the very end, like they finally got through with the giant gorilla and monster and defeated them. Yeah. Music to music. You didn't really learn anything about them other than
that. They are barely a presence. Yeah. They're just there to create a set piece.
They're just a vehicle. They're numbers 5 and 6. Yeah. They're not anything important.
Yeah. And I mean, to be fair, I also think they were the least interesting of the X's in the comics.
Oh, for sure.
Like there was nothing as specifically compelling for them. You get the impression that they were just kind of another dalliance for Ramona, not particularly important.
Who she also cheated on with. Yeah. Yeah, she cheated on the one twin with the other twin.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
And instead of being mad at her for using them, they're pairing together. Well, no, instead of being mad at each other for cheating on their brother, they're just mad at her. Yeah. Which is a classic, like, that also through line with Knives Chow. Yeah. Is like, I'm not going to be mad at Scott. I'm mad at Ramona.
That's right.
Because Scott cheated on me with Ramona.
Misdirected anger.
Yep. Yeah. And it comes back through at the very end, especially in the comic. But yeah. The twins, non-presence whatsoever. But we do meet Gideon.
In a way that's very different from the comics.
Yeah. At the show. So it turns out that the Battle of the Bands through line story from the movie is they're going to win a record deal with G-Man Graves, which happens to be Gideon, who happens to be Ramona's last evil ex. And we see him at the show with Ramona after I think her and Scott had a fight, and then she's at the show with him. And you kind of like see like she's still talking to him. You're like, why is he so horrible? Like, why is she talking to him? Right. Yeah. And then what happens after that? After the final battle of
in the movie?
Gideon signs Sex Bomb.
That's right. So
Scott's like, I don't want to play. I'm like, okay, well then Young Neil's going to take your spot, and then they get a record deal with.
That's right. Well, that's what's interesting is they bring his orchestration in a much clearer way. In this scenario, because in the comics, Gideon doesn't really, he flashes through, but he pops up really in his last. Yeah. He's mentioned as a presence throughout, but he doesn't really pop up until the bitter end. He gets his own sort of focus. Whereas in this, it's much more clear that he's running the Spectre-like operation that's trying to destroy Scott Pilgrim.
And it makes a lot of sense in the movie that he is a record label head because most of the evil X's are involved in showbiz.
Yeah, right.
Or music.
Yeah.
So the twins are the DJs, Todd's the bass player.
Yeah.
Matthew Patel dances with his little, and then actor. The only one I don't get is Roxy, but maybe she's just there because she hates Ramona.
I think she's there. Yeah. I think that what is kind of fun about what O'Malley does is that he's really using this as an extended metaphor to talk about how insular creative communities can be, and how like even in big cities, very small groups of people can sort of revolve around the same art form, the same medium, but ultimately big resentments can develop through people who can peddle influence, like Gideon.
Don't shit where you eat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that comes up really clear in this, where they're extremely bitter. They're bitty.
They're
bitty. Yeah. They're bitter when they talk about Clash of Demon Head, because they are a struggling band. It is a constant gag in the comics that they suck. They're not good. Nobody likes them.
No one likes them. But in the comic, they keep chugging along until they just break up. Like they're more of like, oh, we're recording. And that whole bit in the comic, like, oh, we're recording. We've been recording for 8 months. Are we gonna have band practice? Like, we need to practice. We have a show tomorrow. We suck.
And like it's one of the funnier running bombs. Jesus Christ! It's one of the funnier running bits in the story is just how bad they are.
Yeah.
And the other funny bit is that nobody can get their name right. So at the initial Matthew Patel playoff, he's just like Sex Bob. The announcer just comes on and just kind of draws it off. Yeah. And even Gideon is like the Sex Bombs, like a cool band with a hot girl drummer. Like that, which is another great bit. And it was like, they have a girl drummer.
Oh yeah. We're crashing the boys.
Crashing the boys.
Is that drummer a boy?
Is that girl a boy?
Yes.
Yes. This one goes out to the guy up top. It's called "We Hate You, Please Die." Oh, sweet! I love this one.
So good. Nice. But yeah, Sex Bomb. I love that name. Just like
it's great.
It's a great name. Like I wouldn't mistake it, but I don't know. I like weird names. So we're on to Gideon.
Yeah.
We're on to the final boss, so to speak, and the sword in the last act. So basically, he goes to win Ramona back. He's not going to let her go. He realizes he loves her. He needs to tell her right away. So he goes to the Crash Theater, which is Gideon's new theater. Chaos Theater, sorry, that he just opened in Toronto.
Yeah.
And goes, and it's like this weird 2000. The aesthetic is very strange.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And Sex Bomb with Neil as the bass player is playing at the opening of the Chaos Theater, and Kim's wearing a black Lolita outfit like she does in the comic. It's a very good throwback. But Gideon's there and Ramona's by his side. And it's like this very evil boss man on like a pillar.
Yeah.
And he tells Ramona that he loves her.
Yeah.
And he's like, and Scott unlocked the power of true love. And he has like a katana come out of his chest that he fights with.
Yeah.
The katana for that comes in 2 volumes prior.
Yeah, that's right.
In the comic, which I found is they took that and condensed it into the final battle. I think it was a good way to do it.
The 1-up too that he gets from killing what's his face, Todd.
Yeah.
Also, it's another thing that comes up in that volume and it comes up later, whereas he gets it in the movie from fighting the twins.
Yes. Yeah. So I think they put it in the twins battle in the movie because it was going to be used relatively soon after that.
You got to get the audience.
They got to get.
They can't. Yeah.
Audience are idiots. You're not idiots, guys. We love you, but
no, we love you, not you guys.
Yeah, you guys.
You guys are great.
But if you show something, unless it's like a thriller that Chekhov's done it in the very first act, like
right.
It needs to be used within 30 minutes, or else people are going to forget it exists.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, he's fighting Gideon and he's losing. But also his henchmen coming in like in the movie, and then is chaotic.
Well, also, what this is one of those situations where the structure of the comics really makes this final confrontation quite different. Where in the comics, at this point, Ramona has been gone for months. I mean, she fucked off. She is, you don't know where she went. She disappeared. She went into space.
There's just a cat.
Exactly. There's the great cat that they share in the apartment who's named Gideon.
Yeah.
Who Scott is like, he becomes an avatar for him to sort of get some redemption through that relationship. And so she is not present when he goes to fight Gideon. And it's less clear that at this point he's numbed himself in the comics to that part of his life. You get the impression he kind of no-shows at work, and he's not at the comics. He's gotten a job working with Stephen Stills, the lead of the band.
Yeah, he's a dishwasher.
And he just kind of gives up. And then he comes back to fight Gideon, and it becomes more of a personal redemption, especially after he's met with Kim, who at this point, as you mentioned earlier, has left and gone up north.
Yeah.
Stay with the parents. And so when he faces Gideon, the visual metaphor isn't there in the comics, where she's not sitting by his side.
Yeah.
There's no sense that he has literally enslaved her to be there. She pops up when he dies in the comic, when he gets destroyed, to remind him that, like, okay, you're not really dead. This is just an idiotic dream. So like, get up. And then he says, oh, well, maybe you are dead. But then he's got the one up that he uses to come back.
Oh, the life. Extra life.
But it is less, because they've broken up in the movie as well, but not a lot of time has passed. This has been...
They do, instead of having it like an extra life where you reboot like, right away, they rebooted him back at his save spot.
That's right.
Yeah, which is the classic gaming thing. So he redoes the entire sequence.
He saves Gums' life. Yeah.
He redoes the entire sequence, and the second sword katana he gets out of his chest in the movie is Scott has earned the sword of self-respect.
Self-respect. Yeah. And I think it's different in the book. It's understanding.
Yes.
It's a different concept.
Yeah. It's funnier with self-respect. I think so. I get why they did that.
Bill Hader also announces the swords and is the narrator throughout the film.
Really?
And it's so funny to hear his voice be like, Scotty has earned the power of self-respect. Like it's very...
Oh, it is.
Very funny.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. So he fights, in the movie, he fights Gideon again, and this time Knives Chow comes into play, and she starts fighting Ramona. And you're like, again, you're mad at the woman that he cheated with, not actually the person that cheated.
Yeah, we're not the problem.
We're not the problem.
Yeah.
And then finally, like, he fully says no. When he gains his self-respect, so we're like, I'm sorry, like, I cheated on you. He finally comes into his own and apologizes for that. And then they can take on Gideon together.
Yeah, right.
As friends.
Yeah.
But in the comic though, it's again she's not in there.
She pops up.
Yeah, but she fights with him?
Actually, maybe not. No.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. Because at this point...
Because there's the one where... I think Steven's like, in the comic, you should go out and have casual sex.
And then he goes back to Knives.
And
they
make kiss.
Peace.
They kiss and they're like, no.
Yeah, they both realize it wasn't. And they're friends.
Yeah.
They've made peace with each other and they're ready to move on with their lives. So yeah.
It's not as dramatic in the comic, the reconciliation, as it was in the movie.
Yeah.
Visually.
Well, and it comes back to that they didn't just break up that week. It's they've had time. They've had months of her being in his social circle revolving around this people.
Yeah, and just getting over him in a different way. So Gideon dies, but they get a bunch of coins raining down
from the sky.
Record deal. That is our record deal. And Steven's like,
there goes our deal.
Yeah.
I cannot praise Alison Pill enough in this movie and how deadpan she is.
And he's just, the Steven lead singer is like scooping up all the quarters.
Yeah. Like, making a little pocket with his shirt.
Yeah. And like, oh no, it's Nega Scott. Scott. And that whole bit about they're like, oh no, he's a pretty cool guy. We're gonna get brunch.
Be good. Yeah.
Good. And yeah, so that's basically the crux of Scott Pilgrim in terms of going through the exes.
Yeah.
I mean, after the ex, they go off and they start their would-be relationship. In the book, it's more of like, we are going to be together forever because we fought this hard. You know, like it was.
They got through something and they finally achieved a kind of parity and some honesty between them.
Yeah.
And so now they're in a healthy place in the comics.
Yeah.
Whereas in the movie,
very ambiguous.
Yeah.
Because they just kind of walk off into the.
They're going to give it a shot. They're just going for a little. Who knows?
They might break up in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Who knows?
Okay, so that was the plots. Those are the 7 evil exes in Scott Pilgrim vs. the Worlds.
Yeah.
Let's talk about. We've talked about this throughout the whole time. How the casting was amazing.
Yeah.
I think that visually, I don't love Michael Cera
as Scott Pilgrim.
I loved everyone else visually, like how I pictured from the comic to the movie.
Yeah, sure.
His acting style and his delivery, yes.
Yeah.
But from the comic, he was portrayed as a like lady killer.
Yeah.
The best fighter in his hometown.
Yeah.
That's not Michael Cera.
Sure.
Cera, by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, strangely, for what Edgar Wright was trying to do, I buy it more. I buy Michael Cera because he seems like he's a little more obsessive and a little more neurotic, and he gets by having a certain sort of indefinable quality about him. Like he is greater than the sum of his parts, and his obsessiveness is what brings him down. His lack of self-respect, which makes him do these terrible things, make these awful decisions that hurt people. Yeah. Is I think part of what makes his casting in the movie interesting, where he's got like, even the angle of his face is sharp. He's got these like, he seems like a guy who is operating in this circle, who is a really interesting guy, and if he got it together, could be a really compelling human being.
But he hasn't.
Yeah, there's something about the look in the movie that works well. But if they had adapted the comic closely, or more closely through live action, I would have wanted someone different.
Yeah. Who would you cast instead if it was more of a direct correlation?
So you want someone in their early 20s, or who could pass for early 20s. He's almost like a Noah Centineo guy, or like,
I can see Noah Centineo if he was nerded down a little bit, because he's always been portrayed as like the hot guy.
Yeah.
I saw someone said Tom Holland.
Tom Holland would be very interesting. And he's got that. He's very funny, naturally, very, very, very humorous.
Other than Scott, I think everyone else was spot on.
Yeah. It's. I remember thinking Julie in the comic book and Julie in the movie is terrific.
Oh, perfect.
And it's also a fun wardrobe choice with her glasses. It's the same sort of thin rimmed glasses.
Stacey Wallace was great.
Yeah.
Steven was great. Even young Neil, I was like, that's young.
So funny.
Yeah.
There's a great line where Knives asks him what he plays, because it's interesting. In the comics, he doesn't ever play anything. He's just hanging out.
Yeah.
And she asks him in the movie, like, so what do you play? He's like, oh, that's a big question. Zelda, Tetris.
Or it's like, that's blue.
Yeah.
And she's like super confused. And then in terms of directing, I don't think anyone else could have done it.
Yeah. Edgar Wright is, so it's interesting because his big debut in the sense of a project that he had a lot of control over was the British TV show Spaced, which oddly enough is about a group of sort of losery layabout 20-somethings who can barely function, who are also both reeling from bad relationships and bad situations. Perfect.
Okay.
So if he had pitched this in the age of like Netflix or Peacock, he probably would have pitched it as a series.
Oh yeah.
And it probably would have been an 8-episode. Or maybe even a couple seasons. They would have probably turned into a couple seasons. But I could see him having done that quite easily.
Oh yeah. Well, now they have the animated show on Netflix, and it serves the comic better directly, having it be a cartoon.
Sure.
At least for right now. So that brings in the question: do you think this is going to be? What's your rank out of 10 global adaptation? Do you think it's going to be readapted, and if so, when?
I think as an adaptation of the material, this is like, in terms of the most literal perspective, it's like a 6 or 7 out of 10 in terms of what it accomplishes, because it does abandon and jettison a lot of the character beats, a lot of the things that I think flesh out the people in Scott's life in a more interesting way. So they jettison a lot and they make it their own thing. As a piece of storytelling, I think the quality is extraordinary. I think this is one of those things where it becomes hard to rank these things because he clearly made specific choices. So like, I don't even know if I trust that ranking and all of like, he knew what he was doing. He could have been more literal. He decided not to be because he wanted to make a movie. And so I almost want to give him credit for finding his version of the story in this. So like in terms of the beats being adapted literally and directly, it's like a 6 or a 7 out of 10. In terms of creating his own special thing based on the material, I think he did a tremendous job.
I mean, we had a similar thing with Pride and Prejudice. With the 2005 adaptation from last week. I agree. I would say like 1-to-1, it's like 6 out of 10. If you're looking to watch the comic on screen in a movie form, this isn't it.
Yeah.
As its own thing, though, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
So like 8.5, 9.
Yeah. It holds up. It holds up really, really well.
Holds up. Okay. Do you think it's going to be readapted? Into a movie? We'll go just a movie because we know the TV show exists.
I wouldn't say movie.
Okay.
I think if this gets adapt it again, they'll keep doing it in an animated format, probably as a TV show. I feel like they've gotten the best live action version of this they're going to get. I think there's so much going on that from now on, I think I personally would want to approach it from an animation standpoint to sort of get more of the spirit of the story.
I agree. Yeah, I don't think a live action movie needs to be done.
Yeah.
They might do it, probably will do it because built an audience.
10, 15 years from now.
Yeah.
But like, I think Edgar Wright has created that. And I think he found his own angle and he made it work. And I don't know that a direct adaptation would even work as a movie because there's just so much you have to condense and you lose a lot. And I think that's why they made the point of just hacking and slashing as much as they possibly could.
They kept it very concise. I would love to go back and rewatch and see how much time each X gets.
Yeah.
In terms of first, second, third act and like how they spliced it apart, what that would have looked like in a writer's room.
Yeah.
So, all right. So overall, I think editing, great. Directing, great. Again, it's not a 1-to-1. Casting, great.
Yeah. I think I'm trying to think if there's anything I specifically want to shout out. Yeah, but the casting is terrific. I think that the it's so wild to see so many of these young actors who are now like
staples,
massive.
Oh yeah,
and like I think we come back to Kieran Culkin, who is possibly on the verge of winning his first Academy Award. Like we're coming from these beginnings where I think everybody looked at this guy and saw he's an extraordinary talent and a really smart performer. He's a really insightful guy. He knows how to make ticks work really well without seeming like affectation.
Oh yeah, he's very genuine.
He's extremely genuine and deeply funny. Alison Pill, call her out a lot. I'll do it again. She's tremendous. She really ties so many of those scenes of the band together.
I mean, Brie Larson has an Oscar.
Brie Larson is an Academy Award winner herself, and again, this is one of those things where she steals a lot of scenes. Her weird ingenue quality in the telephone call, where she almost like he can't even see her, but she has that sort of accusing look when he asks her a question or something like he's like where he asks her if she knows about Ramona, and then she's like, "What? No." Like it's just so.
It's so good, and her tone of voice is like semi-erotic on the phone too.
Oh yeah,
she's like, "And you'll be there,
still breaking our hearts." Yeah,
are you? And you're like, uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But she does that. They picked a tone for her, and the tone was she kept it.
Yeah.
So there was no breaking. Even her singing performance during Black Sheep, it was that's how. If I didn't know what her talking voice character sounded like, and I watched that, it would be what she did.
Yeah.
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 So, it all works.
Yeah.
It all works. Okay, so
one last thing I do want to call out is that they did a great job preserving the importance of the music. And he really sells that because Nigel Godrich, who was the record producer for Radiohead and produced their early albums, including the Bends, is the music by credit on this, and he's the composer for this.
Oh shit!
And organized that soundtrack, and there's so many great covers, and there's so many. Even the music is so important to O'Malley in creating this thing because he based it on a band by a Canadian band called Plumtree, has a song called Scott Pilgrim.
Oh,
and it gets included in the soundtrack. That was the basis. At one point, Michael Cera's wearing a Plumtree shirt.
I don't know. I missed all these little things. You're so good with that Twitter.
He based it on the "I've liked you for 1,000 years" is the line of the song. Yeah. And that song pops up in the movie, and that was a line that inspired the sort of wistful, bitter nature of Scott Pilgrim.
That makes a lot more sense. And the visual switch from comic to, I mean, music in the comic was just kind of like a side character.
Yeah.
And then music in the movie was a main character.
Huge.
Huge flow through. But it's also, that works better visually because, you can't just show on a page music.
It goes back to the Patel thing where it's like, it depends on the rhymey quality, the sing-songy, the lyrical quality of their exchange.
Yeah, for sure. Performance for this one is more important than on the page.
Yeah.
So, okay. We're good?
Phenomenal.
We're good.
Yeah.
All right. So that's all, folks. That's all.
Hubbity-bitty.
And And that's another episode of Adaptation, and the podcast where Sweater and I talk about books to movies. And check out, we're on a more tight posting recording schedule. So every 2 weeks you'll get something from us.
Yeah, I went off on my own personal journey for about 6 months and have come back from my own one-up situation. So I'm excited to get back on track with this. I missed this. I forgot how much I enjoyed this, and I forgot how much I enjoyed sharing my thoughts with everybody on this stuff.
Absolutely. And you can check us out anywhere that you can listen to podcasts. Basically, we're pretty much everywhere. If you follow us on Facebook, we'll be posting more regularly about new episodes on there.
Yeah.
And just stay tuned. So follow, like, subscribe. That helps us, the deal if you listen to podcasts. So
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.